Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Gua Sha Show. And in this episode, we're looking at 5 surprising truths about facial gua sha. So let's start with the first one. So, number 1 of the 5 surprising truths of facial gua sha is facial gua sha is not lymphatic massage. This is about authenticity. It's about being genuine or authentic in your actions. And if you're doing one thing, don't pretend you're doing something else. This is the case with people saying that they're doing facial gua sha, but in fact doing some form of lymphatic work. For example, sometimes when I give a class, a participant will come up to me and tell me about their teacher, their trainer, their acupuncturist, their face coach, or their Instagram facialist, and that they've told them that they should scrape up the neck in gua sha and not down as I show people. So despite my detailed explanation as to why, their faces sometimes give away that they're siding with their trusted source of information, which is the other person. And I'm always fine with this. You can do anything you want. If you want to go up, no problem. If your reasoning is sound, go for it. Of course, not in one of my classes, but in treatments. I'm not going to force my ideas on anyone. There is, however, the issue of equivalence. And this is part of a much wider problem. Their trusted source of information is pitted against my information, like some wrestling match of ideas. I'm saying this, and they're saying that. Who do they believe? Both me and the other party are given equal weight in this choice. But is this correct? Should we be given equal weight on this matter? Well, maybe. There's nothing special about me that makes me better than anyone else. We all have the right to be heard and understood. So sure, yes, you can argue that we should. But on this particular topic, I probably know more than your average person. In just the last year, I spent over 2,000 hours researching and writing about gua sha. It's what I do every single day, and I've been doing that intensively for a decade. Again, this is not to say that I'm better than anyone else. It's just that it probably puts me near the top of that hierarchical pyramid of gua sha advice to trust. Also the fact that I'm not in it to sell you a tool or an oil. These are unimportant. I have a vision and a mission, and everything I've done for the last 20 years has been within that ecology and motion gua sha vision. This goes for my work in health and wellness gua sha, fighting ill health, and in facial gua sha, enhancing the beautiful flower inside you. So to come back to the neck, the natural circulation pattern on the neck is to scrape down in gua sha. If you go up, then you're doing something else. Perhaps you're doing lymphatic work, and that's perfectly valid, and it has multiple benefits, so there's no issue with that. But it isn't gua sha. Sure, people have told you it's gua sha because they didn't know that it wasn't. And this goes back to how facial gua sha developed in the 2000s. It was basically hijacked by the beauty industry and became something that it isn't. People just threw inappropriate ideas at it and started telling everyone about gua sha. Just for your reference, I'm a trained acupuncturist and treated in a decade in a busy 5-room clinic in North Africa. And not once in the treatment of any of the multiple clinical illnesses did I focus on the lymphatic system. This is not that you shouldn't or can't, but that is not part of the Chinese medicine that I base my treatments on. It's not a separate system because it's included in the blood circulatory system that's already been treated. And this is true of gua sha. Gua sha is born out of Chinese medicine, and the lymphatic system wasn't a feature. You might be wondering, well, how can I be so sure of this? Well, I spent the last year going into the history of gua sha and the medical ideas around it. So let me repeat this because sometimes people have got selective hearing. Lymphatic work, that's massage or drainage, is a perfectly valid treatment which can have great results, but it's got nothing to do with the development of Gua Sha. Gua Sha is not about physically moving fluids, it's about changing the tissue. And as a byproduct, this might include the process of fluids. So authenticity with facial Gua Sha is using Gua Sha to describe what you do in the correct way. It's not authentic to use the term Gua Sha to describe a technique which clearly isn't. In order for a technique to be Gua Sha, it has to be related to Gua Sha. This is partly behind the disgruntled Chinese medicine practitioners complaining about other professions using Gua Sha. Apart from the fact that they're probably using it incorrectly too, but that's a whole other matter, their grievances are that the actions of Gua Sha are not being presented genuinely. There's actually no problem whatsoever with anyone outside of the TCM world, so TCM means traditional Chinese medicine. So there's no problem with anyone outside of the TCM world using Gua Sha, but they should do it by labeling it appropriately. When you do Gua Sha, say Gua Sha. When you do lymphatic drainage, say lymphatic drainage. If you do massage, say massage. And when you mix them together linguistically, you start to lose the essence of Gua Sha, and what you do becomes just another beauty technique. It isn't, it never was. It's a transformative treatment which can change the very structure of the body. And if you don't know this, then you've got to find out. Get yourself informed. But in light of what I just said, please be wary of pitting my information on an equal footing with that random video you just saw trending on TikTok. Okay, let's go on to the next one. 5 surprising truths about facial Gua Sha. Number 2. In its present form, it has no history whatsoever. I spent the last year delving into the history of Gua Sha using old Chinese language texts and research papers and whatever I could find in any language. Many people aren't aware of this, but Gua Sha essentially grew out of fighting cholera and febrile diseases in the 17th century. I came across fascinating stories and descriptions of treatments, and I put some of them in my latest book. Now, at that time, Gua Sha treatment was literally a matter of life and death, with one story of 2 neighbours, with one surviving the night after having a Gua Sha treatment, and the other dying by morning without it. And this is where Gua Sha comes from. It wasn't an elite treatment like acupuncture, cupping or herbs, which was reserved for the upper classes. It was a hard, basic and very physical treatment used in the towns and villages with the household equipment of what's around them. There were no fancy tools or special oils. To connect this to what is termed facial Gua Sha nowadays is not appropriate. In fact, it's actually laughable. People who talk about facial Gua Sha having a long history perhaps have never researched facial Gua Sha. Chinese cosmetology has extensive historical records with creams and herbs and ointments, but there's very little that relates to modern Gua Sha. There are some records talking about jade used on the face to remove scars, but the technique was harsh and the jade was granules. And some people point to Empress Dowager Cixi in the Qing dynasty, who was one of the most powerful women in Chinese history. And the descriptions written by one of her servants was of her using jade sticks. She rolled them on her face every day to prevent wrinkles. But again, this is jade sticks. It's not Gua Sha. Just because you put something made of jade on the face doesn't make it Gua Sha. This is the case with jade rollers, which is so important now. And when I trained in Chinese medicine 25 years ago, these were part of dermatology. And now they're presented as beauty tools. So what this means is that much of what you see on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok isn't actually based on any historical foundations. For much of facial Gua Sha, this is just 30 years at most. And this is the problem. When something is taken and removed from its historical context, it loses meaning, It becomes a vacuum in which anyone can just fill it with whatever they like. And this is exactly what happened with facial gua sha. Okay, let's come on to number 3. So, 5 surprising truths about facial gua sha. Number 3, it's not and never has been descriptive. With facial gua sha, you're not supposed to only treat the face. This is another big misunderstanding. People think that facial gua sha is for the face and body gua sha is for the body, and they're 2 separate things. It's another invented concept created straight out of thin air. The main reason such a concept exists is because the name gua sha was co-opted by the beauty industry and it fit the pattern of facial skin techniques. The fact that facial gua sha is not and has never been a skin treatment makes this totally absurd. It's looking at facial gua sha superficially, seeing a tool moving over the skin and concluding that it must therefore treat the skin. This is that vacuum of information that I mentioned earlier. How can any attempt to treat the face with gua sha not include the body? It's utterly impossible. Unless, of course, what you think is gua sha isn't. And it brings us back to the authenticity issue. If you just treat the face with a tool and claim to be using facial gua sha, then maybe you aren't. Maybe it's a skin beauty treatment. For gua sha to be used, you have to include the context of gua sha, and that's the body. Quite why people think there's an invisible cut-off point somewhere in the neck, which separates the face and the body, is just beyond me. It makes no sense anatomically at all. Of course, every part of the face is intricately connected to the rest of the body. How often can you see the state of someone's health from their face? It's so obvious. Facial gua sha is gua sha focused on making changes to the appearance of the face. You do this by treating the face and the body with an understanding from anatomy, physiology, and embryology to understand how they're all connected. This is the proper definition of facial gua sha. It's not that you treat the face. It's that you target the face. And the way you do that is by treating the head, the neck, the shoulders, the arms, the hands, the back, the chest, the legs, and the feet. If more people understood this, then they would get more to the heart of what facial gua sha really is. Okay, let's now move on to number 4. 5 surprising truths about facial gua sha. Number 4, it's not about meridians and energy. Anyone who wants to denigrate Chinese medicine points to the energy, meridian, yin yang, qi package and their perceived prejudices against it, saying that it's unscientific, it's all magical, it's all made up. And it's an easy thing to do. But to some extent, these people have a point. The ancient Chinese writers of the Huangdi Neijing, the classic book of Chinese medicine over 2,000 years old, were experienced at autopsy. They write clearly about cutting up bodies and taking measurements of organs, and they used to explore blood vessels with reeds. Essentially, they were looking at exactly the same human body as we are today, and they didn't ignore what they saw. They incorporated it into a wonderfully complex understanding of how the body works in conjunction with the natural world. Much of this has been channeled into a certain understanding, especially in the last 75 years, which you may be familiar with and which has become modern traditional Chinese medicine. But how about if I told you that instead of invisible energy lines, they were talking about the development of rivers and the growth of trees, that they saw patterns in the human body that are identical in nature, and that they applied natural laws of physics to the body. They didn't miss the arteries, the veins, the capillaries, the fascia, the muscle, the tendons, the ligaments, and the other connective tissue. They put them into a context and were referring to them as the giant river systems crossing the body. So it's important to get away from the acupoint idea of pushing one small area of the face and by magic something happens. The body doesn't work like that. When you treat the face, you're treating a group of separate ecosystems which run down the body. And while they appear as the familiar blood vessels, muscles and so on, they have the same actions as streams and rivers and lakes. When you start to see how the ancient Chinese incorporated the beauty of nature into the context of facial gua sha, you'll see how the facial glow after a facial gua sha treatment is actually the bloom of your internal flower, and that you're achieving your potential. And that itself is beauty. Okay, let's come on now to the fifth of the 5 surprising truths. Okay, 5 surprising truths about facial gua sha. Number 5, there are no facial gua sha tools. This is perhaps the biggest fallacy about modern facial gua sha. To take something as beautiful as facial gua sha and the wonderful ideas of beauty behind it and reduce it to a tool, an oil and a stroking technique is nothing but totally wrong. There never was one specific tool used in gua sha. It developed in towns and villages, and lay people were using it, and they used what was around them in the kitchens and in the houses. They used soup bowls, they used soup spoons, they used tongue scrapers, they used hemp cloth, they used willow branches, and they even used salt. There's no historical gua sha text which talks about a tool other than these simple household items. And the reason for this is really simple. The tool is unimportant. Gua sha is not the tool. It's what you do with a tool that's gua sha. A flat pebble from the beach is just as good as an expensive heart-shaped jade. You're not supposed to know this though. You're supposed to think that the tool has some magical properties which will make the effects of the scraping so much better. You're supposed to think that you must have that tool with all the strange dents and jagged edges, or you can't do facial gua sha. That's the business of modern facial gua sha. I'm well known for using just one tool, the Chinese soup spoon, and absolutely nothing else. If you came to me for a facial gua sha treatment, that's exactly what you'll get. A simple Chinese soup spoon. The reason for this is that word authenticity again. It's about honouring where facial gua sha comes from and acknowledging that all of the results of facial gua sha come from you and your technique, not any made-up tool quality. So there you have it. That's my 5 surprising truths about facial gua sha. And actually, I have so much more, but I think that will do for starters. So I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I'm looking forward to explaining more in another one.